Hello, everybody out there in the land of make-believe. Uncle Barko here, and I was going to do a top 10 video for you. That's not happening. It was going to be top 10 questions artists have about selling their art. And basically, if you're transitioning from being a hobbyist to a working artist or a full-time working artist. And it was the top 10 questions I see on the social media. Question number 1, pricing. Yeah, that's a full video. That's a full, there ain't gonna be no top 10. This ain't gonna be no top 10. I'm just gonna do pricing in this video. Cause I started to try to tackle pricing. Thought it'd be easy. It's all the same formula. There's lots of people who use all kinds of different formulas. How many websites they're selling on, how many shows are they going to. It's all relative to how you're running your business, but they're all gonna be some form of time plus materials plus overhead, plus marketing, plus profit. So you got your 5 components in the formula: time, materials, overhead, marketing, and profit. And I see a lot of videos, people say that online. They're like, yep, it's this, that, and that. I'm like, oh, okay, let me figure out. I got this thing. How much do I want to price it? Well, how much time did it take me? What is my overhead? So I'm going to break it all down, real simple. And again, this is just one formula. This is just one way of doing it. A lot of people have a lot of different ways of doing it. Some people might say the way I'm doing it is completely wrong. And they're probably right. If I'm wrong and you got corrections, tell me in the comments where I'm screwing up. But that's basically what it is. But I'm going to break it all down for you. And this is for handmade items. I'll make a graphic and I'll have, let's take this for instance. So this is a graphic I made, and I have it printed on all kinds of stuff. I have it printed on skateboards and grip tape and hoodies, and you can buy a poster of it on my website, barkotoyco.com, and also follow me on Facebook. So yeah, if you're doing print on demand or something like that, this isn't the formula you're going to use. You'll use a completely different formula. I'm talking about if you take something and you make it by hand and you just want to sell that thing that you made, right? So this is the breakdown for that. And you can use this. You can apply this to other things, but basically that's all this is about. Is let's say you paint a painting. Let's say you make a sculpture and you want to sell that and then make another one. And you want to make a little money off of it. You want to make a little money off. You can sell a couple things to a couple friends and make your money back, and then have enough money to buy some more materials to make another thing. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about turning your hobby into a business and being able to sustain that business and then make a little money as well. Here's the formula broke down into itty bitty little teeny tiny pieces. And you want to get a pen and write some of this stuff down, because I ain't going to repeat it. Most of my videos are just off the cuff, blah, 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 but I had to write a bunch of stuff down. So pardon me if I'm not making eye contact. Okay, so the first component of pricing your item is time. From conception to the client having the item in their hand, how much time do you spend on that? And so you need to be, first of all, you're going to need to be able to estimate how much time it's going to take you to do a product. So especially with commissions, that's the tough one. That's on you. You got to figure that out. You get a commission, you want to figure out how much to charge for it, and you're going to have to figure out how much time it's going to take you to make the thing. Now, I just did a commission, and I was like, it'll take me 3 hours. Took me like 5 days. I wasn't thinking about a bunch of things. I screwed it all up. But yeah, it took me a while. Luckily, my client's like, no, I'm going to give you more than that because I know you're underbidding yourself. So before you start pricing anything, before you start doing commissions, you really need to sit down with yourself and figure out how much time it takes you to do things. It's easy enough if you already made the thing just to know how much time it took you to make it, but you got to clock that. You've got to clock how much time it takes you to make a thing in order for you to be able to come up with your own pricing. And I think a lot of the questions I see online, they're just like, what do I charge for this? What do I charge for that? You have to figure a lot of this stuff. You're going to be able to get some formulas. You're going to be able to get some ideas about how other people do it. But in the end, you're going to have to figure out for yourself how much it costs you to make a thing. And if it's good enough in the end for you to charge that price. Because, I mean, you might spend 10 hours making a thing, but, you know, you're not too good yet. You know, your skill level's only, I'm not insulting you. My skill level's very low. And when I estimate how much time it's going to take for me to make a thing, I will err on the side of less time, because I haven't figured out my workflow. I don't use Photoshop. I know there's programs I can use that can do half the work that I do for me with the click of a button, and I don't use those programs. So I have to compare myself to what a professional artist would be charging in the same situation. How long would it take a professional artist to do the same thing? So all of this pricing is ambiguous as heck, but you need some metric by which to try to figure it out. So when it comes to time, first you have to figure out your hourly wage. Very simple for me. I know that in the last job I worked, where I was technically proficient as I am at doing art, I was making $20 an hour plus benefits. When you start an art business, you become two people. You become an employee and a boss. And you need to pay your employee for their time. So I charge my business $25 an hour for my time. And that includes the amount of time it takes to make the art, any time I have to put into marketing the art, listing it on the particular website, packaging it if I'm shipping it out, all of that time. Any time I put into that particular piece, it will go into my labor cost. So there's other labor costs involved in all of it. There's marketing. You have to spend time researching, search engine optimization. You've got to source materials. There's time you spend, but not on that particular piece. And that time goes into what I call like overhead. So forget about all that extra stuff. The time that we're talking about now is the time that you put in on that particular product, from the time you start working on it till it ends up in the hands of the client. So if your client is asking you to use a material that you would not otherwise use, something very specific, or if you need to use something very specific for that piece, and you have to do material sourcing and spend time finding that material, yeah, you definitely want to charge the client for that, especially in a commission situation. If they got you out goose chasing for some weird little unique bit of something, then you need to take that into consideration when you're calculating your labor costs. But forget about that for now. Basically, we're talking about now making the piece, listing the piece on your Etsy site or whatever. I don't use Etsy, but I recommend Etsy for people who are starting out, and I recommend you get off of Etsy as soon as you figured out how the whole e-commerce thing works. But yeah, it's a good, inexpensive way of learning how the whole process works. Yeah, so you have to spend time, once you make the item, you've got to spend time listing it on your Etsy site or your website or whatever like that. That counts, especially with one-of-a-kind items. Less if you're doing production pieces, but, again, that's, I'm going to need to deal with that now. Let's say it takes me 3 hours to make a sculpture out of polymer clay. I'll work on a clay piece, then I'll have to cook it a little bit, and then I'll work on it some more. It takes me about half an hour to cook it. It's about half an hour downtime. Put it in the oven, let it cool off, be able to work on it again. Let's say it takes me 3 hours altogether, but I have to cook the clay twice, which, I got to keep an eye on it. But yeah, I can be doing other stuff. So I'm not going to put that in my labor charge. So if it takes me 3 hours to make the piece, but for an hour of it, I'm dicking around doing something else, that's 2 hours. That's 2 hours on that particular piece. But then once you're done with it, you've got to set it aside. You've got to, again, list it on your Etsy site or whatever. Then somebody buys it. You got to package it up. and you have to ship it to them. So all that stuff you're doing, if you're doing stuff, that's work. You need to charge for that. So it takes me 3 hours to make the piece. An hour of that I'm dicking around. I'm charging 2 hours, but then I've got another half an hour of doing stuff online, packaging, whatnot. So I'm gonna put a labor price on that at 2.5 hours, which if I'm charging $25 an hour, it puts me at $62. So for the time component of the pricing, it's all of that stuff. It's all of that stuff. And you're going to come up with a little number and you're going to set it aside. Because now we have to add material costs. Materials is the canvas, it's the paint, it's the clay, it's the dye, it's the ink, it's the googly eyes. Whatever it is that goes into the piece and goes away with the piece is included your materials. And you need to keep track of that when you're buying it. If I buy 100 beads for $10, then I break down the cost of that $1 per bead, and then I write that on a little label on my little bead containers so that I know when I'm putting a piece together how much the materials cost that I'm putting into that piece. You got to know that. You got to know what your material costs are. Let's say you're making a sculpture. The material cost is whatever it is the clay is. So for me, if I'm making a sculpture out of just a polymer clay, cooking it, wrapping it, and sending it out, my material cost is going to be the price of the clay and the price of the packaging. And that's part of the material cost. Anything that goes along with it. Now, I use tools to shape the clay. That's not part of the material cost. That's not going with it. I'm going to be able to use that tool on other things. That's going to go into overhead. Forget about that. We're just talking about the materials that you use on that particular item that goes to the client. But that does include the boxes, the tape, the dunnage. Dunnage is packing material. So that's your material cost. So now you've got the cost of your labor, and then you've got the cost of your materials. For me, if I'm making something out of Sculpey, my material cost is only like $6. So you got your labor, and you got your materials, and then you have to add overhead. Okay, so for overhead, it's a little tricky. Maybe you don't rent a studio. I don't. My studio's in my apartment. So for overhead, you got rent, you've got your website fees, you've got your website hosting fees, fees for if you use QuickBooks, you can get QuickBooks for like I think $15 a month, something like that. So you figure out how much you spend annually, and then you'll break it down. So for me, I don't rent a studio, so theoretically, I charge myself $100 a month rent. So that goes into annual to $1,200 a year. And then I pay an annual fee for my web hosting through like 2 Cows or something. That's like $15. I pay every 3 months, I pay $60 for mail service. Where people will steal my mail. If I get a package of materials or something, they just swipe it. It won't be there. So I have a mail service for that, and that's part of my overhead. Utilities, part of your overhead. So now you take that number, you figure out everything you have to pay for in a year, how much it costs. You take that number and you divide that by the number of hours you work in a year. And I'm going to give it to you. You don't have to figure it out. I'm going to give it to you. I'm just going to give you an average. So you're running a business. You're working that business full-time. A full-time employee works about 1,950 hours a year, give or take, depending on what kind of PTO and what holidays you get off. So you're going to just use that as a metric. I don't know how much you work. Maybe you only work four hours a day. Maybe you only work 4 hours a week. I don't know, but just the easiest way to figure out your overhead so that you can put a price on this item already is take your overhead, divide it by a 40-hour work week. In the end of the year, that's going to come to 1,950 about. So you divide your overhead by 1,950, and then you multiply the result by the hours that you worked on the piece, which if we're using the example from earlier, I worked 2.5 hours. I worked 2 hours on the piece and a half an hour on handling and dicking around. So that piece is 2.5 hours for labor. And then I'm going to take my hourly overhead and add 2.5 hours of overhead to it as well. I hope that makes sense. So you've got your hours in labor, you've got your material costs, and you've got your overhead broken down into hours, basically. Now you want to add marketing and promotion. Marketing and promotions kind of covers a large area for me. Some of this stuff you might be put in different categories. I'm putting this in marketing and promotion. One of the problems that I have is reconciling being an artist and being a business person, because they're two completely different mindsets. If it were up to me, I'd just be doing art all the time, and then I go put my art somewhere and wait for people to buy it. But you can't do that. You're going to need to spend time figuring out how to get clients and building brand recognition. You're a brand now. Hate to break it to you. So I run the Barko Art Studio on Facebook. I run Barko, the Barko Toy Co. When I just published a book, and that book is by Barko Wolf. My brand is the Barko brand. To make sales, you need to have people come to your website, come to your shows, come to your social media page, see your products and buy them. You're not going to be able to just make something and then throw it out there and some little birdie's going to come by and pick it up and sell it for you. That's going to be your job. And that's part of marketing and promotion. And you need to be compensated for that work. Again, if you were running a business, you would have a marketing department. And the people who work in that marketing department are you. And you need to pay you for doing that job. You can't break it down for each piece. I'm going to market. It's going to take me 2.5 hours to market on that one. You can't break it down per piece. It's kind of like overhead. You just have to figure out what your general annual marketing budget is and add that to the piece. I think that as far as I've seen, most people just add 20 to 30%. And then the last component is profit. Yeah, you're making an hourly wage as an artist. You are never going to see that. That's not, when you sell something, you're not going to be taking that, putting it into your pocket. It's all going back into your business. At some point, that you'll start breaking even and making money. Unless you're making sales every day, all this hypothetical money, you're not going to see it. It's not going into your pocket. If you sell a piece, you're going to want to put all of that money back into materials and build up your supply. If you do it all right and you make sales, there will be a tipping point where you'll start seeing that money come back in. And that'll be nice, but that's not where we're at now. We're just trying to figure out pricing. And part of figuring out pricing is adding profit. So what I do is I just take the regular price, I combine my profit and my marketing, and I add 50%. So if I've got an item and with time and materials and overhead, comes out to be, let's say, $100, I'm going to add another $50 to cover profit and marketing. And again, you're going to have to figure out all that for yourself. Maybe you're not going to do any marketing, okay? So, you still want to have leeway for running sales and stuff like that. So it's always good to just include all of these things in your final price. So now you've got all the components figured out. You figured out the price of the time it took. You figured out the price of the materials, the price of your overhead, the price of your marketing, and a little bit of profit. And add that all together, and that will be the final price of the item. When you put it on your Etsy site, you're going to put $150 on there. Or if you're putting a tag on it to sell at a craft fair, $150. So now you've got a price in mind. You figured out time, materials, overhead, marketing, profit, put it all together. Let's say it comes to $150. Is that your final price? Maybe not. These are all just, it's just a metric you use to figure out what you might want your final price to be. You might go online and see that people are making the exact same thing and charging much, much more or much, much less than what you want to charge. Again, that's on you. You've got to figure out, is it more or less detailed than what I make? Is it better or worse materials than the materials I'm using? What is it that makes the price different for something that somebody else is selling and something that you are selling? They might be scammers. You know, you might have $150. You go on Etsy, see somebody selling the same thing for $20, and then you figure they're probably scammers, scamming. But you know what? Maybe you're overpaying for your materials. Maybe you're not sourcing the best price for your materials. If you're going through a lot of materials, getting a couple cents off here or there can make a big difference. Maybe it's taking you too long to make your art. For me, it takes me too long to make my art. I don't have my workflow figured out real well. I know that there are programs for my graphic art. I know that there are programs that people use, like the Photoshop or whatever, that does what it takes me an hour to do, you can do on one of those programs just by pushing a button. So when I'm figuring out my time for my graphic art, I have to take into consideration that I don't know what I'm doing. So yeah, you've got your base price, you've taken the formula, you've calculated it out, and now you've got to adjust that price for what the market will bear. Okay? And sometimes you might find that it's just not worth what you think it's worth. And sometimes you're just not going to be able to make what you want off of a particular project. And you got to pump the brakes sometimes. Sometimes, until you figure out how to make that product at a comparable price, you might want to choose something else to make until you got it figured out, because you don't want to cost yourself money. You don't want to start your business by costing yourself money. So that's something you have to take into consideration. There's also something called perceived value, and maybe it takes you half an hour to make something and you only spent $10 on material, but it is super cool. People look at it and go, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I need one of those. And you get to bump the price up for that. If you've come up with something that's cool, you get paid for the cool factor. You can charge a little extra for something that's super cool. That's it. Now you know how to figure out what your labor cost is. Now you know how to figure out what your material cost is. Now you know how to figure your overhead, your marketing, and adding profit, and that is going to be the price of your item. Ish. Kinda. So, gosh, was that helpful? I don't know. When I started doing this, those are the little bits that I needed to know, that if I just sat down and tried to figure out, it was going to take me a long time. Now that I'm into it, 4 years, that's when I'm sitting down to figure out a price, that stuff is just automatic. Okay, it took me this long to do that long to do that, and I made sure to track the material costs and all that stuff. And now I can automatically kind of figure out a price for an item without really having to do the math. And it's arbitrary. I'm sorry. I don't like arbitrary things. But when it comes to pricing art and handmade goods, it's not an exact science, I've worked for companies. We made products. We could figure out what the product costs to the half a penny because all of the information was constant. But as an artist, man, things change, and some stuff takes more time than other stuff, and it's all really hard to figure out. Trying to turn your hobby or your talent or your skill into a business, you got to be able to deal with, some kinds of ambiguity. You're going to have to deal with that there is no exact way to do a particular thing. And you'll see videos out there like this where it's some expert saying, well, no, you do this and you do that. It's super easy. You do this and you do that and you do this and you do that. And then you're done and then you have the price. But it ain't that. It ain't all that. It's ambiguous. and you're going to struggle with it. I still struggle every time I make a price. I set the price, I'm done, and I'm like, I hope that's the right price. It's not easy. None of this is easy. It's real hard, and if you're frustrated, you've got the right to be frustrated. If you're watching videos and they're telling you, oh, it's just this and that and this, and it's super easy, and that frustrates you, you've got the right to be frustrated. A lot of the people out giving advice and making videos aren't really artists. They're just entrepreneurs, and they just know how to do the stuff. I am not an entrepreneur. I am an artist trying to figure out how to make some money off of selling my stuff. And that's it. That's it. That's the breakdown. That's the granular breakdown of how to set a price for your item. So I hope you took notes. So I'm not sure what my next video is going to be. I'm trying to get them out every Wednesday. So stay tuned. Maybe I'll have another video next Wednesday. But I'm putting up content every day on my Facebook page. I'm constantly posting new art. I post other people's art. If I find a cool artist, I will post a link on my Facebook page. So check that out at the Barko Art Studio on Facebook. Also, you can buy my art toys. You can buy cool swag like this on my website, barkotoyco.com. So that's it. Until next time, as always, art is 10% vision and 90% remembering what your particular vision is. So always remember, never forget your vision. And Godspeed, Earthlings.